Welcome back to We Know Scripted TV, where today we know Andor Season 2, episodes 10, 11, and 12, the final episodes of Andor. My name is Grace, but of course I'm not alone. First, I'm here with Mike Bloom. Mike, how you doing?
Grace, as the grammatically incorrect like to say, Andor closes, but an window opens.
Perfect. I thought that was a weird last line to leave the show on, but they
Yeah,
did.
it
If
was weird
anybody
that it's weird that the
deleted
baby
scenes,
said it too. That the baby
that's right.
started talking. They did the whole CGI mouth moving.
All right. I was gonna say we have a baby of our own, but he's not a baby. He's a full-grown robot. It's Taran Armstrong. Taran, how you doing?
I'm apparently a baby, so
Oh, you're a full-grown
All
robot. Is
right,
what
well
I
now I
said.
need to sign off of the podcast. We all know my own personal writers in these contracts.
Yeah, no, but that's what I said. He's not a baby. I said he's a full-grown robot. Is what I said.
yeah,
Taran,
that's. I mean, listen, when you are a fully grown adult, when somebody says, you're not a baby, that's very reassuring. Yeah.
yeah, you're not a baby. I'm saying. All right.
Thank
Well,
you.
the last 3 episodes of Andor they're out. We've watched them. Mike, I'll start with you. What do you think?
I mean, this was such a servant to many masters. I feel like this final batch of episodes. Of course, we did a death draft last time. There were certainly characters we thought had to be cleared off the board. Some met expectations, some did not, which we can certainly get into. What I would say overall about this batch of episodes is that episode 10 to me, if I had a credit every time a season of Andor had episode 10 as maybe my favorite of the season, I'd have 2 credits because I adored episode 10. I think even if we saw the Luthen death coming, this was such a perfect way to take a full scope of the character, ironically enough, through such a focused lens on his origin story with Kleya as we really send this guy off in true fashion. And so I will admit, I think that's when the arc kind of hits its peak. And I would say overall, I think the season kind of hit its peak around episodes 8 to 10. Not to say that the other 2 episodes that followed up weren't great as well. We got some incredible K2SO action. It just felt like they then had to kind of do the job of threading this needle, right? Of like, let's live in this post-Luthen world, but then also get Cassian fired up enough and set up enough to then segue into the events of Rogue One, which I felt was very solidly, suitably well done. It was not a show that was going to have this big, cataclysmic, fantastic ending like Rogue One proper, but I thought it was a very solid finish to, a really fantastic arc overall.
Yeah, what about you, Taran?
Yeah, I mean that's exactly I think what I've been thinking. The thing I've been thinking in my head is that I thought these were really fantastic episodes, and I think it was a really good finale of a show. If that makes sense.
Yeah, I think especially from what we are to expect with finales of TV shows, like capital F finales. Though, I mean, Kleya and Cassie are going to talk about this at the beginning of the finale, right? When she says, "Oh yeah, after all this, what a bitter ending to be on Yavin," and he's like, "It's not an ending." And I wonder if that's how we sort of have to change our perspective as well. And that while this was the ending of Andor, the TV show, it was more so kind of like the season finale, and I guess the series finale is Rogue One, the film.
Right. Yeah, that was sort of the thing, right? Where it's like as a finale for a show, it was fine. It was like it did its job. As episodes, they were really, really good. I really liked them. But then with the proper finale to this story being Rogue One, we talked last time about how I was going to watch Rogue One. And I've already briefly talked about this now on of all things the Last of Us podcast, but I watched Rogue One, and the first time I watched Rogue One, I'd been watching all the Star Wars movies, and after watching all the Star Wars movies, watching Rogue One, it was a breath of fresh air. It was different. It was fun. I really loved it. Watching Rogue One after watching a bunch of Andor made me go, "Oh, this sucks." This is a bad movie.
I was thinking earlier about should we be watching Rogue One, and then Taran was like, "Actually, I think it's maybe a bad movie now."
I did what I said last time, which is I split the baby. I watched the first half of Rogue One, which, to your point, Taran, is definitively the worst half of Rogue One. I mean, once they get down on that planet, once that climacticism happens, like, it's some of the best Star Wars content out there. But yeah, maybe the first half of the movie is not the best thing to kind of segment it, especially as a follow-up to Andor, the series.
it's such a mess in many ways, and I know a lot of that comes down to the production of it and the reshoots and everything. I actually listened to a podcast about the making of the movie. Shout out, a very good podcast called Going Rogue. Um, but but yeah, I mean, listen, it's still one of my favorite Star Wars movies, but just in comparison to Andor, it is so much worse. And I think the whiplash of that, and the fact that this is everything that Andor hinges on for its finale, definitely weakened the impact specifically of the finale for me. The show, I think, can still stand on its own as something really good, but again, for the ending of this show, it was unfortunate to me that it has to lead into something so messy that kind of starts to feel like it's taking away from the ending of the show. But yeah, that was sort of the biggest fault I saw.
Yeah, I think that's this is actually like helped me articulate like how I'm feeling, which is I feel like I'm a little I think that the first episode is really strong and I like many parts of the last batch of episodes, but overall, I mean the show just hit what I consider to be the high of the series, which is already an incredible like it had an incredible season 1. I think I said at the time like that's the best season of television that came out that year. It for me, I think it's like, you know, it's kind of apples and oranges or whatever Star Wars fruit they eat in Star Wars. But in between it and the Mandalorian, in terms of like Mandalorian season 1 is like maybe my favorite Star Wars property, but they're different. They're doing different things, and so this is like I do think, you know, it's a prestige Star Wars show to a degree. And season 1 was so good, and then this last batch, the penultimate batch we got, I think for me is the best stuff we had seen on the show. And so of course like the show has to figure out like where to go from there, and I almost feel like it has a little bit of its hand tied behind its back, because what I think works so well in episode 10 is it's mostly a combination of Luthen's story and Luthen's presence in the rebellion, which for my money is the most interesting part of the show. It's not just that this is a show about rebellion, it's sort of the like gritty dark underside of what leading a rebellion looks like, what it actually takes to do it, versus the sort of like, you know, I think that there's been a lot of, as we're sort of like now, just to like put you know, ourselves in perspective, the first batch of episodes have aired on Disney Plus, and so we've seen the reaction to that. I actually think there's like some misreading of like even Mon Mothma as a character, and sort of like, but in my head I sort of put her and Bale in one category in terms of like the leaders of this rebellion versus someone like Luthen, and the exploring those two different things. I think Taran, I don't know if we talked about it. I can't remember which one of you I talked about this offline. Apologies, but sort of like leftist versus liberal.
Oh yeah, that was me.
That was you, Mike. Yeah, sorry, Taran. If you want to take credit for it, though, you can.
All of us white guys look alike to you, Grace. We get it.
Yeah. But that idea, I thought like leading into the last one was really good. But then I feel like they still have to sort of like set up like there's more to this story that is to be done. So wrapping up a thing which is a thing that I think the point you made, Taryn, which is that it feels more like a good season finale than a great series finale, which I think is a good point.
Yeah, I mean, I think what the last two episodes accomplished the most for me was kind of serving as that culmination point for Cassian's storyline. Forgive me, you two. I'm going to talk about Lost for just a couple minutes. So feel free to skip ahead if you haven't seen Lost. First off, watch Lost. It's on Netflix now. Super easy. But skip ahead about 2 minutes if you don't want to know stuff about the end game of Lost. But Cassian's final sort of realization about his place in the rebellion in these last two episodes gave me a lot of Jack Shephard in season 6 of Lost vibes, where, for those who need a reminder, throughout the majority of Lost, there are these two kind of diametrically opposed forces in Jack and John Locke. Man of Science versus Man of Faith. They literally come to fisticuffs at one point. Season 4 is this whole division as to like, I'm going to leave the island versus no, you can't leave the island. You have to stay here. And despite the fact that Jack divorces himself from Locke, calling him, for lack of a better term, too extreme.
I didn't even know they were married.
Yeah, exactly. No, it was a real secret scene, Grace. They don't like to get into it. It's for an upcoming season 7. But Jack is able to come around partially in Locke's death to realize that not necessarily like he was right about everything, but that Jack's devotion to the island comes about due to kind of carrying on from where this person left off. The metaphor that Josh Wigler and I like to use is that like Locke got it most of the way across the football field, and then he passed the ball to Jack, who brought it into the end zone, basically, to the point where Jack ends up becoming, albeit briefly, protector of the island, something that he would not have believed in, even a couple of years ago. And that's kind of the similarities I see with Cassian as well. That despite all of this bristling between the two of them, despite the insistence of, I made a choice, you're not making any choices. No, I'm making a choice to leave you. The fact that Cassian is the one to be the loudest mouthpiece for the words of Luthen. To your point, Grace, when there are so many people who are leaders of the rebellion that are blanching about this news about the Death Star, I think does hold a lot for me in the fact that despite pushing against him for most of this season, if not most of this series, Cassian has taken that lesson from Luthen and is able to carry it forward into the events of Rogue One.
Yeah, there's something like interesting here for me because it did feel like a huge part of this last final batch of episodes had to do with Luthen and his final contribution to the cause, and like theoretically that final contribution is like this final piece of information. He died for this, is like constantly said, but then like the thing that I kept running up against was if you watch Rogue One, in like one of the first scenes, they get that almost exact same information, only better, from an entirely different source. The source he's going out to see at the end of the show, which really seems to negate the entire purpose of that information being necessary at all. Which started to get me thinking, like, is this a comment on how Luthen really was useless at his end? He really was arrogant and thought that he needed to be staying there and taking this risk when that information came to them anyway from a defector, and all of this. But I think like the thing that I've come around to is more so that like, yeah, to some degree that information was useless, but Luthen's real contribution and final contribution to the rebel cause was Cassian himself. The person that he was able to recruit and over time inspire to be so fervent for the cause, and his last final act of sacrifice, Luthen's, gets Cassian so invested in this particular piece of information and this particular mission. And in Rogue One, it is Cassian who is going to, we talked all about like this idea of like following orders, being an individual. Cassian is the one that is going to reject the decision from like the council or whatever, and go and do this mission on his own with the people that are loyal to him, his buds. And so that is the way that I have found, like, I think fits through here, but it still does feel a little bit like we're really trying to fit into this very rigid structure of Rogue One in order to make this work. But I do think that was always the intended purpose, that Cassian, more so than the information itself, was Luthen's real final contribution.
Yeah, and I do feel like there is a thing where obviously Cassian wants them to believe the information, but I think more so he does seem to get sort of like offended at the idea that, like, just how upset he is that they're not sort of respecting what Luthen sort of sacrificed. So I feel like is sort of, to me, more important in that final batch of episodes than the actual information, and then what they're going to do with it, that I feel like is important. But let's set up sort of how we get there, which is we do get this episode 10, which is it's Luthen's sort of swan song on the show in terms of his last episode, but it also fills in a lot of backstory between Luthen and Kleya. And I know, Mike, you said like this for you is the best of this batch, for sure. So what in particular like worked so well for you?
I think it's because of, first off, we very sparingly use flashbacks in Andor. We got them in the very first batch of the entire series when we find out a little bit more about Cassian's backstory, the planet he grew up on, his sister, and the fact when he was picked up by Marva and made his way off of it. But otherwise, it's been very much living in the present. And so Luthen has been a man of mystery to the point where we found out in this episode, his name isn't even Luthen. That this is the identity that him and Kleya take on after this experience. So first off, I was just grateful to get any sort of background into him before we lost him, that yes, he purposely brands himself as a man in the shadows. You're not supposed to know about me. I am Axis. But at the same time, it's always good to know a little bit of backstory for these characters. And B, especially to speak at this idea again of it's less so about what Luthen did and more so what he represented. And so we see him making one of the most pivotal relationships in his life in the form of Clea in, from my perspective, a very unsuspecting way. I don't know. I wasn't doing my study on Wikipedia, but I don't think we necessarily knew before this episode that he was like a sergeant in the army and that, he ends up taking pity on this girl and brings her sort of like Artful Dodger style, into his sort of cotillion of espionage. But to find out a bit more about sort of the sensitivities he has in his own heart, both in that moment when he's like very clearly shell-shocked by a lot of the carnage and mayhem around him. You start to see what he got inspired by and what caused him to, ironically enough, feel like he needed to take action from the destruction he was witnessing by causing more destruction, right? For being like, oh my God, this is too much. By the way, in a couple years, I'm going to blow up a bridge, Clea. But at the same time, to see what was very clearly a very loving, caring, inspirational relationship between two of these characters that we did not get to see this much. We saw a bit more of a partnership between the two of them, but that was essentially it. And so to get a lot of background on this man and to compare and contrast his origin stories of wanting to start a rebellion with someone like Cassian as well, which is like similar and different, of someone who was kind of part of the machine and felt that this was something he did not want to actively be a part of anymore. I thought was just such a great way to build out this character, despite the fact that he's going to spend the better part of this episode laid out in a hospital bed.
Mm-hmm. Did we find out the name of that planet that they were on?
I don't know if I have it in my notes.
I don't know if it's said in the episode, but I think according to Wikipedia, I think Luthen himself is from a planet called Fondor.
Because just a brief aside, because there were we never like found out about Cassian's sister, right?
No,
I had a brief moment of like, wait.
Oh, fun. Yeah.
Was this
classic?
The same? Was this Kenari? Was this where is she?
No, Clay is a Skywalker.
Yeah, exactly. That's actually why she pulled the plug on Luthen, because she's a Palpatine clone.
Well, I think for me, the scenes I really liked. I was about to just basically describe all the flashbacks. I just like them. Which is this instinct that Clea has to fight every fight, and to say, like, when she's sees the civilians being escorted and executed, and Luthen's gonna leave, and she's like, "Why? What are you doing? Like, those people." Like, this is an injustice, and he recognizes, like, if we fight every fight, we'll lose. We're only going to fight fights we win. But what I really like is the scene where they're going to blow up the tanks on the bridge, and he's like, I don't think we're going to do this today. And she, like, he sort of spotted it, and she sort of pushes back a little bit, and then he goes, okay, like, we're going to do it today, and they do it. And I feel like that push and pull between them, and that, to me, it's like, I was a little like, ooh, the first episode of this last batch, we're like going flashback heavy, but I think it is so important into the theme that this way that the, like, Bail and Mothma both feel like Luthen was like, in some ways counterproductive, like he was not to be trusted. And there's ways in which, when we see from the beginning that he has always been against this, he has this change of heart as he realizes, like, just how awful he, like, being the soldier, what the things are actually doing, and ultimately does it. But he, knowing that if you just try to, if you make as much noise, you're just going to get shot down. So you have to be much more careful and methodical to basically get to a point where the rebellion can actually do it. And it's really interesting, I think, Mike, even as you're, like, talking about, like, this very caring, kind man who, like, takes care of Clea. It's the same episode where he shoots Lonnie on the bench. Like, he shoots him, he kills him.
My guy.
I know. I was gonna say, and I mean, I think it's a representative of the fact that this is something that Luthen has kind of always lived with, and maybe this comes from his military experience, which is the end justifying the means. During that moment where there's that firing squad, he expresses to Clea, young Clea, that fighting to win is losing over and over and over again until you're ready. It's essentially like almost to go to use droid terminology, like beta testing, right? Like essentially trying all these methods until you finally find the one thing that works, no matter what lives are expended. And so to have him espouse that in a flashback, and again to have that move forward into like all these random gambits that he's throwing out to, again, this sacrifice that he takes on personally to be like, I do not mind losing my life. He talks all the time so fatalistically to Cassian in like episode 9, right? The last time they see each other, of like, yeah, we're both going to be hung. This is the die that we cast when we both joined up into this. Like, this is something that he always knew was going to be inevitable, but he is happy to be that loss in the grand scheme of that win. And what I do like about the Claire relationship as well is that, like, he does see an equal in her fairly early on, right? When they're taking on these new identities, he is not the one to, convince this shopkeep to haggle and bargain to get the identities that they need without paying, out the nose. She's the one to do it. And I think, again, just to get drips and drabs of this relationship, but even see in that moment how things change from like caretaker and, refugee child that he happened to take pity on to like, oh no, this is someone I can collaborate with, I think was very fun to watch the wheels turn in his head a bit, considering how he's going to use that with someone like Cassian later on.
Yeah, I just think like this backstory makes so much sense for Luthen, being a soldier, his willingness to die for his cause tracks with that, but also like I imagine a regret and shame for the things he was a part of before, a willingness to sacrifice himself as sort of penance for that. It makes a lot of sense that he's always been willing to use the tools of his enemies because he was a tool of his enemies at one point. And so like that, it fits so perfectly. This relationship with Clea is so interesting because he needs her to be willing to do the things that he's doing, but at the same time does want to protect her from it as to the smallest degree, right? Like he wants her to be able to walk away from this in a way that he can't. And then we see that struggle in her after he dies, which is like, I can't not be this. Like the idea of going to Yavin is like anathema to death to her. And I think this is such a great ending for her character too, given that note that like she doesn't really know what to do now. But Luthen tried to just leave that door open for her so that there was a possibility. And I thought this was like when I think when we did our death draft, I thought that perhaps this was the ending Luthen was going to get, which is like, now you have no use. What do you do when you thought you were going to die? But I actually do think it makes a lot more sense to give this to Clea, who Luthen wanted this for, and left that door open for.
Right. She got brought in, and so it's like, what does it look like now when it's just you, right? Like Luthen was sort of
literally been her whole life.
Exactly. Yeah. Like this is because she doesn't know anything else. Not only that, but like, what was she going to go back to? Were this not the case? I mean, what I think also really interestingly spurred everything along in the present is the fact that, maybe to your point, Taran, be it redundant or not, is this information about a Death Star from your boy Lonnie, which will also tie into the Dedra stuff and how that ends as well. And I think we sort of forget, because A New Hope was the first Star Wars movie, and it's like, oh yeah, they destroyed the Death Star by the end. Like, how big of a deal the Death Star was. Like, the Empire, yes, has had an iron grip over everything in the galaxy for a while, but this is a weapon of mass destruction. Like, this is an entirely different thing, to the point where they have been going about the secret project in so many different ways, Kyber crystals, Gorman, etc., scrounging together all these supplies under all these different guises to assemble something that can blow up a planet. Like, it cannot be overstated how massive of a thing that is, to the point where it does make a lot of sense that ends up being sort of the inciting incident of this final batch of episodes. That once Young is able to communicate that, to Luthen, it just sends everything off into a spiral where then he's going to get the information to Clea, who's going to get it to Cassian, which is then going to, spur forward him bringing the information as the rebels try to prep for it. Again, I think it's something that, because the Death Star has kind of been a part of Star Wars lexicon, Grace, from the very beginning, we sometimes take for granted just how earth-shattering, quite literally, of a revelation this is.
Well, there's the ongoing joke about like, wow, it was really easy to blow up the like giant planet destroying item, but yeah, no, I agree. And actually what I think is actually like, I want to get to the Death Star, but actually like I feel like episode 10 is like not really about, it's actually the reverse. It's actually about, it's not about getting information off the planet, which like it does, like eventually Clea gets the information and gets it out, but it's actually about making sure that Luthen basically can't be tortured to give up information about the rebels. So you get this reverse thing where like this scene with Dedra and Luthen is, I like it a lot, and specifically when she shows up and it's surrounded, but this back and forth where she says like, you disgust me, everything you stand for, and he says freedom scares you, and she says it's not freedom, you want chaos for everyone but you, ruin the galaxy, and then run back to your ridiculous wig and your little workshop. And he says,
how dare you, the wig's great.
Yeah, he says the rebellion isn't here anymore. It's everywhere. There's a whole galaxy out there waiting to disgust you. This is so good that he's going to stab himself with the knife, the relic in his shop, and then it's going to be about Clea getting to Luthen to basically like take him off life support. This sort of like, I was going to joke, the world's worst heist, basically, like get in, kill your father figure, and then get out. I thought made for a very enticing, like the weaving this in with the flashbacks of like she's trying to get in to kill him so that he cannot be tortured and give up the information, I thought was like really well done.
Yeah, I would agree with that. And I love that, again, we get yet another parallel of like the Javert Jean Valjean showdown where it's not as visible as like Cyril and Andor was, which like had its roots in episode 3, but like let's remember Dedra Meero is someone who has been like first-handedly dedicated to hunting down Axis, to the point where, as we'll get into, she has kind of gone off the radar a couple times, done some unconventional actions to try to squash this. And so I loved the confrontation that happened where you could tell this is like her finally getting that kill that she has wanted for years and years and years. And then, much like her boy toy, it gets snatched out from under her nose in multiple ways. And that he decides he would rather die on his feet than live on his knees. And while that death will be prolonged, he's basically like, yeah, you're too late in multiple ways. And it unfortunately is one of the first steps, Taran, to this miserable ending for this character.
Oh yeah, and it's a great ending to the character. We talked all season about her and how she like the fate of what's Cyril, her and Cyril, and how their approach to the Empire is different, and like the ideology of the Empire, and how Cyril sort of was not willing to bend his ideology and was disgusted by what Dedra was doing in the previous batch of episodes, and ultimately dies. And we talked about like, is this going to inspire her to maybe drift away, or will it make her double down? And very clearly, I think we saw that she doubled down, and Axis became sort of, I imagine, even more of the enemy to her, the person she really placed the blame on. It's not my fault. It's not the Empire's fault. It's this guy. It's this enemy that I'm searching for. This is the reason why Cyril died, not me. And in pursuit of that, in pursuit of trying to bring this guy to justice, trying to take this guy down, she cuts some corners. She finds some of that individuality, and then is just completely crushed for it by the weight of this system, because she was not given the means to do the thing that she needed to do. And maybe part of that is her identity, and maybe part of that is because of the system itself. But like, she desperately wants to be in something that doesn't care about her. And so the second she tries to find any sort of peace for herself, even if it's in service of this system, it says, no, you have failed us, and we are going to lock you away forever. And I think that's a brilliant way to end this character.
Not only that, just the pure delicious irony, right? That due to the fact that Young went through her files to find out about the Death Star, due to Young's death, she is public enemy number one, the first accused of all things being a rebel spy. That's what Krennic says, right? Like, if you're not a rebel spy, you're doing a pretty damn good job at being one. Like, the fact that she has been dedicating her life to hunting down these rebel spies only to be accused of being one. And there's a little bit of a goofy gesture, but, it's very on the nose to have Krennic put his finger on her head and twirl around as if he's spinning on an axis, I think is a very fun, almost like Twilight Zone-y type of ending, right, Grace? That, like, of all things, she gets put in an Imperial prison because she's being accused of being a rebel spy.
She's the only spy that gets put into prison.
Yeah, and she's not even a spy!
Yeah.
Well, yeah, I mean, there is a degree to which, we talked about how, like, timely the show has felt in the year 2025 coming out for its second season, but there is this thing that I think people keep saying about the way things are happening right now, specifically in the United, Canada is not without fault, but we had an election and we did not vote in the right wing. But not to brag for a second, not that
you can thank us.
Actually, listen.
I will say,
we're the Luthen. We had to live in the shadow so that you can live in the light. Okay.
I will say, I called this before the United States. I said, if Trump wins, I actually think, sadly, that is better for Canada in who we will elect or not. And that's
what they say. You lose and lose and lose until you figure things out.
I was correct. All that to say that people keep this thing of, like, so specifically for me, there's this thing about trans rights are under attack in a lot of places around the world right now, not just in the States, in the UK as well. And people keep asking. This thing went around on Twitter a little while ago and on Instagram that was like, what are you going to do now that, like, trans men who are sort of biologically female and might have already been in their transition are going to go into women's bathrooms and now look the way they do, and and how are you going to police all of this? And what it's going to do is it's going to affect anybody who breaks gender norms. And I say all this to say, like, yeah, eventually, like, the fascism, you're only free from not, like, being under authoritarian rule until it's not convenient for you to be safe, and so in this situation, like, as soon as there is the hint that Deirdre might not be useful to them anymore, she's thrown in prison. I think it's a really, really, I think, strong ending for the character, but also on the thematic point of, like, what it's actually like to work for the Empire, to work under fascist authoritarian rule. Yeah. Where should we go next? It was really fun to see K2, Mike.
Yeah, so let's talk about this, because I would say one of the few things that worked for me the least about this arc is honestly the end of episode 11. Like, this cliffhanger of, oh no, Andor, and Melshi and K2 are going to the apartment when the Empire is, and it's like, you're basing a cliffhanger on 3 characters that we know will live through to the movie, and you're trying to figure out, like, oh no, are they going to die? I mean, we got the immediate payoff, and K2 is just incredible in so many ways, but I felt a little bit like, this is how you enter episode?
Can I just say, I feel way less bad about not remembering the Scottish guy after watching Rogue One, because he's barely in Rogue One.
Is he Melshi? That guy? No, which guy?
The guy that went on the rescue mission with them. Melshi, he like dies off screen in Rogue One.
Well, I really thought for the way that, like, he, like, hand up, like, puts his head around, they're like, he must be way more important to the movie than I remember. He
probably has, like, 3 lines of dialogue.
Yeah, I think probably, Mike, this is a thing where, like, they want this, like, action piece in the middle here. They want to get Clea out. The closer we get to Rogue One, the like Cassian's been in these type of situations before. It probably does make sense to, like, I'm pretty surprised Will makes it. There's a couple people we put on our death
I
draft.
was
Like,
very
I'm pretty
surprised. I was
Yeah.
surprised Will and Vel in particular made it.
I
out,
don't
'cause,
remember who was on the death draft. I forgot who I
Would you like-
picked.
I have it here if you
yeah, I
would
was gonna
like.
say.
I think it's a tie between the two of you because neither of my characters, Edie, unfortunately, is not even seen in the last episode.
She might
So
have
I
like
think
died of a broken heart
might
here
have.
in between.
And I had Dedra as well, who ends up in prison. You, Taran, had Lonnie and Clea, who Lonnie dies, Clea survives, and Taran, or Mike, you had Luthen and Will. So Luthen dies and Will survives.
Yeah, but I mean, no matter what you might think about, again, if they're trying to shoehorn in some sort of big cliffhanger, what a showcase for freaking K2SO. Like,
Yes.
so much fun to not only have the Alan Tudyk one-liners of, I was in a parade once. It's like, oh yeah, I forgot you are essentially a former Nazi robot who has been reformed. But just the absolute brutality of, someone asking, "Are you with us?" and he says no and throws him off the bridge, of him using one of these ISB people as a human shield as he's bulldozing his way down the apartment. Like, it's just a fantastic reminder of how Rogue One in many ways does go there with some very extreme methods, but in very salient ones. And just to have K2 be so nonchalant and also so casual about this stuff as well, because he is a super strong robot that it's basically indestructible. He's just absolutely laying waste to all the baddies around him.
Honestly, maybe one of my bigger complaints about the show is that I wanted more K2. When I initially heard about Andor as a prequel show, I was like, ooh, I'll get to see lots of K2. Like, he's one of my favorite characters. I think genuinely a high point of Rogue One, even on the rewatch, was how funny K2 is. And I wish there was just more of it.
Can I ask a question as you've watched the movie? One thing that I was like a little, does the bomb that saw like the gas thing, is that a big part of Rogue One? Is it in there?
No, but he is like on some
he's
oxygen of some sort.
Yeah, he's like he's like huffing
huffing.
stuff when he's talking with the Riz Ahmed character.
Yeah, he's on stuff.
Okay, all right. Well, I just definitely thought we were getting a bomb situation.
Yeah, I was actually thinking back as to like, okay, was that sort of a dead end of a plot? I mean, you could also make the argument that like that very much like galvanizes Will to then make him feel like he has to go to Gorman, so he brings Andor along, and that's what leads to Cyril's death. So, like, there also might be some connective tissue there as well with the Rhino.
I mean, yeah, I think the big thing is that, like, Saw as a character, he is representing one side of rebellion as well, which is sort of like the lost your mind kind of side of rebellion. But also, I think like that entire sequence was for the screaming at the end of Will, and quite frankly, still served a lot more purpose than Cassian's original foray on Yavin in the first batch of episodes.
I feel like we haven't talked much about it. Sort of this, like, there's the convening of the leadership on Yavin, which is Bail and Mon. Is that Admiral? Is that Akbar? And
that is not Admiral Akbar.
Oh,
no, I believe that this is a Rogue One story as well, and that like they were going to bring Akbar in originally, but they didn't use him, and so they brought up a different character. But I mean, we should talk about this. First off, I didn't realize until this last batch of episodes we are officially having a Benjamin Bratt spring. I guess it is. It is Benjamin Bratt who is playing new Bail, but also like new Bail Loki sucks in my opinion. Like, he's making this argument to Cassian of like, whoa. Don't you think this is all a little suspicious? Like, how do we know that Luthen's information is good? My dude, a year ago, you had not one, not two, but three people in your personal security detail who were undercover ISB agents. Are you of all the people having a leg to stand on here by saying, like, I don't know, there might be something fishy going on?
I did have the thought, like, does Tony Gilroy not like Bail Organa? Like, what's happening here? Like, recast him, like, makes him suck so much. I also thought it was very funny how we were watching this, and then like over the next few weeks, I was starting to see like the leaks of like, did they recast Bail Organa? Surely not. And I was like, oh, they did, didn't they?
Friend of the pod reached out to be like, is the rumor true that Benjamin Bratt is playing Bail Organa? And I was like, it is true. It is. It is.
Yeah, this is unlike like Luthen's information. This is not false. This is not hearsay rumors. Take it, without a grain of salt, I suppose.
Mhm.
Um,
It is weird. It's sort of a weird like the recasting and sort of the positioning of Bale, I think, taking the hit for being like the representative of the anti-Luthen sort of faction. I can understand though why, and I think it is I think it works. I think that just it would have been better if they had set it up a little more. Like for because he is sort of a good representation of maybe as Mike would have put it, like the liberals versus the left or whatever.
I thought that was your point.
Like an an establishment kind of rebellion versus the Luthen side of it that like
Right,
did
but
what
we're like,
needed to
oh
be
yeah,
done.
I want a rebellion, but not like that. Let's not be savages.
Exactly. And the disdain for the guy that made it possible for him to be in the position he's in the first place, I do think makes a lot of sense. I just don't know if they like did enough of the groundwork to make it feel correct.
Yeah, I kind of wish that it was Mon Mothma instead of Bail Organa, because I feel like more so Mon was kind of set up as this more
Mhm.
clean hands, I'm rebelling in my way, while Luthen, you're doing it in your way. And again, Bell gets a little bit of a redemption here when he's the one that goes to Andor and is like, you know what, I'll let you go on this thing. I don't trust Luthen's information entirely, but it's clear that you do, so go ahead and do this. To your point, it seemed like if it was a character that wasn't Bail Organa, who has been connected in essentially every Star Wars property with like, this is the guy who's working from within to, bring everything down or help prop certain things up. It just felt like maybe this could have been a moment for either Mon or a different character rather than, to your point, when they kind of built up Bail to be in that moment, only for him to then 2 scenes later be like, nah, it's okay. I know it was a little harsh back there in the meeting room. You can go.
I think what I do like about it though is just, I mean, like if you sort of take everything we're up to at this point, which is how much everybody has sacrificed. Like I think that there was this like conversation about like whether or not Mon Mothma is like is she sacrificing as much as Luthen? And like they're just sacrificing two totally different things. Like Mon is literally using every bit of money she has to fuel the rebellion, like she and giving up her status. And that's like that is a different
And
thing
her
that's just
family.
and her family as well. It's a great point. So I like the idea that she was not sacrificing, I think is like very silly because I think she obviously is.
Yeah.
I think there's also this piece though, if you think about them, like we know that the rebellion will succeed. So there's a little bit of like a tricky thing that they have to do in the sense of like, you have to imagine how precarious this is as a situation in terms of you are now for really like exposed as being a rebel group, and the idea that you could get sort of like eliminated and all that work go away, I think is like a fair thing. And maybe I'm giving the show too much credit in the sense that like you could build some of this in, but just how like the more you are exposed as a group, the more like the more that the sacrifices you made not become lost, but like you need this thing to succeed,
Right. Like
and so
what was it all for? If you marry your daughter off, if you essentially like leave your husband probably swimming in debt at this point, if you had one of your best friends from childhood killed off by Luthen, it better pay off and meaning something, which is then I think why they bring a lot of weight to like, again, this better be good information. We are not going to hang ourselves to lead to ourselves being hung essentially on information that may or may not be salient.
um and Bale presumably knows, well, he knows, right, who his daughter, is, who his daughter is,
That's,
as
that's
well.
the other thing as well is it's like again, I don't know about this information. Like, my dude, remember when you dropped off those twins that were assumed to be dead on these distant planets? Like, you're a big secret keeper. There are some secrets that you can stand on here.
It was also like the entire point of having to kill Luthen was that they were going to be able to get the Yavin information out of him, which was incredibly dangerous for him to know and stay there for so long. But like the idea is that if Luthen is in any way compromised, they're not going to like feed you some bad information. They're just going to show up and blow you the hell up. But yeah, like,
That is true.
you know what I mean?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Any other characters endings you want to talk? I mean, we do
I
get.
want to talk about. Can we talk about the Partagaz death for a second? Again, one
Yes.
of
Oh,
the few
yeah.
characters to get wiped off the board here, and it's a small moment, but I think a really interesting one because Partagaz, we got a lot of ISB detail in this series. It's one of my favorite things about it is we got to see a little bit more of the rank and file behind not necessarily the stormtrooper helmets, but like even those that are plotting the maneuvers of the stormtrooper helmets. And Partagaz obviously not nearly as big of a character as Dedra or as Cyril, but I think still serves as a bit of like someone that was caught in the middle of this as well. He, like Dedra, is brought into this Gorman project, this Death Star thing against his will. He's serving as like her closest form of confidence in all of this, even when she has doubts. And so we get this scene following, Dedra's imprisonment, following the Luthen deck, where he's listening to the Nemec manifesto, and particularly really living in this idea that as Luthen is going to tell Dedra, like, it's kind of already escaped. And I think, there's a really fantastic line because one of the covers that Partagaz tries to use with the whole Clea thing is like, oh, she was just a sick patient in the hospital and she's spreading a virus. So that's why we have to lock everything down. And she's a person of interest. No other reason. And so when Krennic walks in, Partagaz says it just keeps spreading, doesn't it? And so I love the virality of that as well. And the pure irony that, again, he was trying to masquerade his own sort of manhunt under the guise of a pandemic, when really he is coming to terms with a different type of pandemic. That this idea of freedom and rebellion has already spread. It's impossible to contain, and it's impossible for him to kind of like contain those thoughts as well. I don't think he necessarily, I don't know, I'm this might be my incorrect read on it. Like, I don't think he dies by suicide because it's like, oh my God, they're going to kill me now because I know too much, like with Dedra. I think it's also partially informed by the fact that like this is just overwhelming him a bit too much. This idea that all he has worked towards, to that point you just made, Grace, is starting to go up in flames. That he's getting brought in on these bid projects that might be overwhelming to him. I don't know if he draws the line at mass murder, but like he is slowly discovering that he has built an entire life based on keeping a boot on the neck of the galaxy. And now that boot has loosened. And he decides to quite literally shoot himself in the foot.
He's such an interesting character to me because he's pretty slippery, I think, in terms of like if you try to like figure him out. He's the portrayal of him, I think, has been so good all the way through. He seems so kind so much of the time. Like there's just like a kindness to him despite how ruthless he is. He never seems to show any kind of that like he's not like a robot, but he does not have the same kind of impulses and individuality moments that that the others do in the ISB that we're following. He really is just like that very effective cog in the machine, who is just doing his job really well. He's always able to see the correct thing. He is just very, very good at what he does. And despite being so good and really not making many, if any, mistakes, he's still losing left and right. And that's what the speech is, right? Like it is so unnatural, and they can never win because any small act pushes the cause forward. And so, yeah, I think more than anything, he was just defeated ideologically. That like, despite being really good at what he does, he was just never going to win, and his function, his purpose is moot. And so, yeah, he just ends it.
I mean, and this is, I think, if the best, comparison between the Empire is Nazi Germany, which, talk about this was very common at the end of the war that many Nazis killed themselves before the end of the war. So I feel like there is just this thing of like the thing that you were saying about like how competent he is and how much he can see ahead. Like he just he's seemingly knows what happens to dead.
Yeah, which is wild because you could argue from an objective perspective, like they're putting in the finishing touches on this giant planet-killing laser. Like this should be the biggest win for the Empire, but I think due to a lot of the firsthand complications involved, someone like Partagaz, to your point, kind of sees the writing on the wall and is like, this is really nice to have, but it cannot, even if we blow up 1,000,000 planets, there's going to be 1,000,000 more rebels to pop up in their place.
And I think it's important that the officer guy, I don't know his name, when he leaves the room, knows exactly what he meant when he said, give me a moment. That like this is in some ways expected, part of the culture, that like if you no longer have purpose, if you no longer have a purpose to the greater thing, then you are disposable. And so I think that this is the other side of what happens to Dedra, obviously, but like she fights it, but he has always been a willing cog. And so when he finds himself not useful, it's just over, and it's just accepted that that's going to be the case.
Yeah. Anybody else would talk? I mean, I would love to talk a little bit about, like, does the last moment of Bix has a baby, does it work for you? Like, I mean, can I tell you my first immediate thought was like, oh, future Andor, Andor Jr.
There you go, Andor,
Well,
the next generation. Yeah, because
yeah.
it's not explicitly said on the show, but I believe, and this is a little bit of insider information, that Tony Gilroy has confirmed or will confirm that is indeed Andor's baby. It's always tough, right? Because like TV and movie babies pop out and they look like a year and a half. So it's always tough to do the math and be like, okay, wait, it has been a year. But that indeed does seem to be Andor's baby. And so from that perspective, like, I do like it in that, and Andrew's going to say this to Vel earlier in the episode as well, right? When like he's going to ask how she is, but then also really takes her message at face value by saying she's safe, isn't she? She wouldn't be safe with me. Like, again, really cementing the heartbreak, but how it was necessary for him to proceed with the cause and fulfill this sort of prophecy that's been beheld to him. But it also makes me feel a little sad because, to your point, Taran, we know the next stop for Cassian Andor, and it's not back to that planet. He's going to be blown to smithereens getting these plans for the Death Star. So it is sort of this pang in your heart of like, oh, this is a kid who will never know their father. But I think something that really does work is that while they don't know, will probably never know the role that their father played in their life, they'll feel it in the fact that they will soon live in a liberated galaxy.
Mm-hmm. I loved this. I thought that there's definitely a world where like it's a little dramatic. It's a little soap opera, right? And I can see that, but I was really searching for something to like hang my hat on with the end of the show, right? Like I really wanted the show to have at least one thing that was its own, that it could like end with. And so when that scene, because I was, when it ended with him like going to the ship or whatever, I was like, okay, end of the show. But then when we see that scene, it's like, okay, this is the end of the show. And it hit me hard. Because his fate, and because also one thing that it did for me that I really liked was that we talked about how thematically her leaving made sense for Andor's character. But I also was a little bit skeptical about it in general, because it did also seem a little soap opera. It felt a little bit like, does it make sense character-wise that she would just like leave in that way? And it makes so much more sense when oh, she found out she's pregnant.
Right.
And so she needs to leave, and she knows that if she tells him that she's pregnant, he will for sure abandon the cause.
Yep.
And so it retrospectively made that work so much better for me, while also just being a gut punch of like, yeah, this is what he fought for. And if he had gone back to be with her, they wouldn't have blown up the Death Star. And so this really was like the right decision for all of them, in the same way that Mon Mothma had to give up her family, right? He had to give this up, willingly or not. It was nice to give the show its own final piece to end it on, and I thought it was great.
Yeah, like very self-contained, right? Because like we didn't know Bix before Rogue One, so this is like the one that's not attached to the movie proper. I think there's also some fun sort of full circle elements as well, like the fact that we are back on Mina Rao. I guess Bix is thinking like, they won't strike the same place twice. They won't come back. So maybe we'll live on Brasso's
We could have
corpse.
seen the little robot guy, right? Did we?
He was there. He was
did.
there. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
I feel like
B2 was there.
the biggest thing I think we've gotten feedback already on the first episode is that I think at least I was just wrong about the read of Brasso and the guy. Most people
Farmer.
think Brasso bailed out the farmer. Most people think that the farmer that's what most people's read I think is.
I think that was my read, right?
Yeah, I think you had it right.
Yeah,
John,
but I like that because again, it's not the planet that Andor started out on, but it does have this sort of again element to it of all right, here is this next cycle of an Andor. They're living on this remote planet, living this like pretty quiet life without any linkings to the rebellion, when really in the background they are inherently linked by DNA to the rebellion. I think again, the thing that I have loved so much, maybe the most about this series, is that it is one of those rare Star Wars series that does focus on the non force sensitive people, even though Andor does get a May the Force be with you in this final episode. Like, it's focusing more so on the meat and potatoes people that were arguably as important, if not more important, to the rebellion than some of our capital M main characters. And so to end on that, right, to end on just two citizens of two citizens of the galaxy just hanging out on a planet waiting for the shackles to get unfettered and for them to carry on this free life. Again, it also speaks to the full circle element of the Andor-Luthen relationship too, where like you could say in a manner of speaking, Andor had to live in the shadows to make a sunrise that he will never see, but his child will, even if he has no knowledge of their identity.
Do you think honestly, my thought was like, okay, well, there's like we could get Andor Jr. in another story at some point. I was trying to like quickly do the math. Like he's too young. I mean, not that he couldn't be, if it's or he or she could be like. I don't think they're gonna put him in Mandu Grow. He'd be like 9 years old, I think.
I feel like honestly, I think it would cheapen the story to have Andor's child be anything important.
I could see like what I would see if we're talking about who will make cameos in The Mandalorian and Grogu is I could see some of the pieces that were surprisingly left on the board. Like what is Vel doing throughout the moments
Will,
of the
I feel like
someone? Like what happens to them in episodes 4 through 6 and maybe 7 through 9? Are they just hanging out on Yavin? Were they some of the people part of the Red Squad as they took on the Death Star multiple times? Did they die in the fracas? What Clea? Is she just like, to your point, Taran, is she a lame duck just kind of like hanging out on Yavin until the end of time? Could there be something to invigorate her and put her back?
I think Clea is the character I'm most interested in terms of like where does she end up? Because what does a person who's spent their entire life essentially being like a terrorist do when you win?
Yeah.
And it's over.
So let me ask, do you know how many Star Wars movies are like confirmed to becoming, including Mando and Grogu, or like I think mostly
the Rey story, right?
Do you know
how many of them are actually going to happen?
No, I know. So like big caveat that they might not happen, but do you know how many are like basically announced? Do you want to take a guess?
What, like 4 or 5?
Like about 5 billion.
12?
Yeah. There's 12.
Where?
One of that
only 2 of them are actually going to happen.
One of that includes the Simon Kinberg like trilogy that he's. I think there's at least 3 trilogies that they've are like there are trilogies that will happen. So like, you know, caveat, asterisk, whatever. But all this to say, like, I do think my thing about this, and like I think about the Acolyte too, where I think like the Acolyte was like not the greatest Star Wars show, but I actually like it more than I think people feel. And then it got canceled, I think, because it was too expensive. And I think about that from the timeline perspective, like it's probably one of the most difficult to like figure out how they end up putting it into other stuff. But I do feel like Manny Jacinto's character, like I know he'd be like so old, I guess, and everything else. But like, how do you get
hot? Still so gorgeous.
Hot. How does he get? He gets frozen. You know, how does he? I'm honestly like, how do we make him ageless? You know, how do we get him in something else? And I feel like the thing about Andor is like, whether or not it's its most like watch show, it's certainly its most critically acclaimed show. And I guess whether or not Tony Gilroy has any interest in doing more Andor, or whether he really liked the idea of like, you know, I will do this and do, I think there's a lot of factors. There's one of like, does he want to do more of it? 2 is like, I do feel like it got truncated to what they probably originally thought in terms of how much time they had and then it ended up being 2 seasons. So whether or not Star Wars would want to do more of this, but I do think like if the show comes out and it's so successful, it does feel like inevitably they'll want to figure out like how do we tap into something like this, and that's just where I'm like, oh, they'll just go with, it's like, Andor's kid in the future, series. But I agree
I would
with you,
just
Taran.
assume,
Yeah.
yeah, like if Tony Gilroy has anything to do with it, I think
Right.
he would probably not go that path. But I assume that like, yeah, you might be right in the sense that like someday some other producer is going to hire people to be like, all right, well, everyone hates Star Wars again because
Right.
none of our stuff is good. Can we tap back into the one thing that everyone, it's Andor 2, Andor Jr.
So I'm saying, baby, and they already did the Goonies show. They did Skeleton Crew. So now, yeah, that's another one. One of I feel like Jude Law's character could show up in something.
Yeah, I mean, it's a great question in general as well, because I think one of the reasons why there is so much acclaim behind Andor through this season, and a lot of us have espoused this on this podcast as well, is because from a tonal and especially subject matter perspective, it felt so instrumentally different from, especially when it came out, right? Like the end of the sequel trilogy, even like the Mandalorian stuff, not nearly as dark and weighty. I think Andor was one of the first shows, maybe besides like looking at some of the stuff from Clone Wars and Rebels at its best, of like truly weighing how difficult it is to live under a dictator, essentially, to live under authoritarian rule. And so I wonder if they will take this success and use it as a way to frame the rest of their system of films, in a manner of speaking. Or to your point, is this more so the aberration of like, great, we sort of have our like Emmy bait Star Wars show, but thing that puts butts in chairs and eyes on Disney Plus, or like pew pew fights and lightsabers and all that fun stuff and marketability. So let's keep going back to doing those things. I wonder how much Andor, not only from a story perspective, but just from like a tonal perspective, would be incorporated into a lot of the materials moving forward. But I think a point that has been made as well is like, does it feel less special if it is? It's almost like this is also a show that kind of takes on a lot of the shadowy, darker elements so that these other types of projects can live in the light and not get into some of the more murkier aspects about both sides of the rebellion.
Well, I mean, ultimately, like Star Wars is a children's franchise. Like it was originally intended to be, really, in many ways, and it's meant to sell merchandise. And Andor is not exactly a merchandise-friendly property. So, for as much critical acclaim as it gets, like it's really not pushing the bottom line too far. I would imagine. So. I honestly don't think we get a lot more of this kind of thing, but I do think it's a healthy thing to have for the franchise in general, and I think that they would be smart to try to incorporate something like this at least every once in a while to keep things fresh for people, because you can only capture that sort of name brand recognition for so long before it starts to fade away.
Yeah, I just wanted to say, I think we're looking at the next thing is, I think, the Mandu. I keep saying that Mandu and Groga, but that's not till May of 2026, and I don't think there might be.
Yeah, like I think Ahsoka season 2 might be the next TV show we have for Star Wars.
Just trying to look at that to see what's.
Can I also mention, like, you talked about the Acolyte and how it was too expensive, and it blows my mind that like that's an expensive show in comparison. I know Andor is also an expensive show. I don't know exactly their budget. I think they're probably
someone's never tried
similar.
to buy a lightsaber. They're
But,
very
like,
expensive, Taran.
Andor looks about 50 times better than the Acolyte did when it comes to like production.
It's all about
design.
practicality, right? It's the fact that you build these sets that truly feel lived in, rather than the volume, which, like, while visually impressive from my perspective, harkens back to like 100 years ago when you just had a soundstage to try to make believe that it's a Western town or this like expansive village. But it's like, oh no, you only woke about 6 feet and then you hit the edge of it. Like, I think authenticity just shows at the end of the day, both in the writing, the performing, and obviously in the aesthetics and cinematography here as well.
Well, I guess so. This is I think it's a little bit of my question, which is like, so yeah, I think Ahsoka would be the next thing that comes out. It's TBD at the moment, no official date, but you would think that probably it comes out before May 2026, which is Mando and Grogu. I feel like we did have sort of this run. We've mostly been in, I think we've exclusively been in the television
Yeah.
world with Star Wars, where you had Obi-Wan and Ahsoka and Book of Boba Fett, even before that, Acolyte, Skeleton Crew. How do we feel? Like,
Rough.
what sort of? Yeah, I mean, but and the thing is, I think that's really interesting is that I think Andor is so different that I don't know that I can say definitively. I really like Skeleton Crew, and I actually like the Acolyte too, but they feel very different than Andor, and I feel like the success of Andor to me, weirdly, does not say like, oh, and Star Wars is great, right? Like that the state of the franchise is like amazing. Even I think some people have a little bit of worry about like how Mando and Grogu, I feel like what people really resonated with was that it did feel different. And once it started to be connected to everything in a way that was like it's really tying into everything, that's when people started to feel a little bit more like it, almost like a cash grab, which is a little silly because like I think Taran, you and I both have we both have Grogu's in our bed. It's literal cash grab.
Merchandise.
We have bought the
Merchandise.
merchandise. So I guess that's my question of like, how do you feel about the state right now, Mike, of Star Wars after the season of Andor?
I mean, I hate to say that, Star Wars and Marvel are inextricably connected, but looking at how Marvel sort of curated its own content post Endgame, I think we could see very similar paths. And that, as we remember, like when Disney Plus rolled out at this point, what, like 3-4 years ago, or I think 5 years ago, actually, it's like, okay, we're going to commit to bringing some of our biggest products onto a streaming television serialized side of things to really burgeon this platform. And it went off like gangbusters at first with the dual success of The Mandalorian and of WandaVision. But I think as the years went on, sort of the popular opinion, and it's something that was espoused by, I think, Bob Iger when he took back over, was like, okay, this isn't really working anymore. Whether like there's too much to watch and it's too much that's involved into canon that feels like required reading, to like this is not a great quality because it has to tie back into the universe and doesn't feel like it's taking enough risks or having its own distinctive voice. Again, I think both properties are having had that similar problem to it. And so I don't think it's a coincidence that Marvel has really scaled back on the shows in favor of propping up movies. And it sounds like Star Wars is doing the same thing. And so for many reasons, I think we talk about how Andor is an exception to the rule in the coverage that it does, in the characters that it chooses to highlight, in some of the themes that it gets into. And that is so, so wonderful. I have loved getting to watch the show. I've loved even more getting to cover this show. I do wonder if this is going to serve, despite the fact that we do have Ahsoka season 2 on the horizon, but like sort of the last sign, right, of like the arc of Star Wars on TV, when Lucasfilm primarily affiliated itself with making these streaming TV shows rather than movies. Is this just like sort of a one-off arc of like a few years, and now we're getting back into the movies because people were generally sort of getting tired with or done with the shows? And if that's the case, fantastic way to go out. I think that Andor season 2, while maybe did not hit some of the high highs that season 1 did, I think part of that is just due to expectations. Is like, I did not expect a Star Wars TV show to do this, and what season 1 was able to pull off was nothing less than incredible. And season 2, again, had some really, really strong stuff. There is very little I have to quibble with that I just like overall did not like at all. Maybe some stuff towards the beginning, but otherwise, maybe from like episode 3 onwards, it was really firing with some incredibly strong ammunition, culminating in episodes 8 through 10, which I absolutely adored. They were brutal, but they felt so thematically on point, so character rich, that if this was a way to kind of send off, to unplug the ventilator, if you will, on the grand experiment that was creating Star Wars television shows as sort of a mainstay, I could think of much worse ways to go out.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, Disney bought Star Wars like 13 years ago.
Yeah.
And in that time, I think that Andor and to some degree Rogue One are two of the only, and let me tell you, I'm a little bit of a Last Jedi supporter, but But I think I've come to realize in my rewatch of Rogue One that I'm way too lenient when it comes to judging Star Wars movies, which should tell you something with how much I didn't like Force Awakens and Rise of whatever. So I just feel like in general they've really dropped the ball here. I think that there have been a lot of good Star Wars things, but very few of them have come out of Disney. This to me felt almost like an accident. I don't think we're gonna get something this good at the very least in the near future, and perhaps ever again for Star Wars. So my hopes are not high, but maybe, just maybe, they'll take a little piece of this and put it into some future projects. And maybe we won't get the highs of this, but maybe the floor will be raised just a tiny bit from it.
Yeah. I think for me, there's a movie called Rogue Squadron, which is scheduled. I think it's by
the Patty Jenkins movie. Did that end up getting canceled at a certain point? I feel like after the Wonder Woman 1984 stuff, it like got shelved.
Yeah, I don't.
So many of them.
I know there's so many of them. James Mangold is lined up to do one, but he did Logan. Like I feel like there's a world where you could get something that's more Andor-y from the James Mangold movie. But other than that, looking at the list, like I think Ryan Johnson is supposed to do one as well. So like there are, I know. So yeah, Filoni, Taika is supposed to do one. Yeah. You think Sean Levy will do it? He's gonna do the Andor movie. No, just kidding.
Well, he's doing Star Wars Starfighter is the movie that is officially that's the only other one on the docket besides Mando and Grogu. May 28th, 2027.
Yeah. Sean Levy not exactly my cup of tea. So we'll see what that he's done, like Free Guy, and he did Deadpool. I mean, he did Deadpool Wolverine, but yeah. Well, very fun to talk about Andor with the two of you, and thank you so much to everybody who listened along the way. As I said, it might be a little while. Probably Ahsoka is probably the next thing that will hit because actually it'd be interesting to see. We might be a little out of sync time wise. Like I feel like they could announce Ahsoka by the time like around the finale of this show airs. So
I just saw something about it. Did they just start filming?
I think they maybe like there was maybe some news behind it. Like I believe Hayden Christensen, who has been making the rounds as of late with the re-release of Return of the Sith, will be returning for season 2. I think there was a first image that was released.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Well, I think
they announced they just started filming.
And we're a few weeks out from this, but Revenge of the Sith has been re-released in theaters, and I think Hayden Christensen was doing some fun like pop-up stuff where he
I saw the video of him actually doing his signature lightsaber twirl. So like everything old is new again when it comes to Star Wars. But to your point, Taran, like I hope that they're able to take some of the stuff and realize that like Star Wars can be capable of so much more that I think even we realize with sort of the stereotypes that were affiliated. And also, if anything, like I know that there was a lot of too close to home moments in this series, but it also is really cool sometimes to like watch the story of what ends up being a successful rebellion unfold and see the similar DNA and what exactly could make up the mind of those who decide to push against their oppressors. And they say rebellions are built on hope, and sometimes it does provide me at least getting to watch this by proxy with some hope about what, again, regular rank and file people are able to do with the small and very big choices they make in their day to day.
Yeah. All right. Well, I think that's it. Mike, quickly, where else can people find you?
So I am at a Mike Bloom type. At the time this is coming out, I believe we'll be encroaching upon the Survivor 48 finale, the Amazing Race finale. I believe it will have aired its 2-night back-to-back finale for season 37 coming up over the next couple days. So I got you covered over there. Of course, Grace, you and I, as well as Taran, are covering The Last of Us, which at the point this is being released is rounding the bend on its second season. So incredibly intrigued to see both where that goes and the conversation and discourse therein. And there'll be plenty more stuff to come, both scripted and unscripted over the course of June. But you can follow everything I'm doing, including on Parade, including on Cameo, at a Mike Bloom type.
And Taran, what about you?
Find me on Twitch and YouTube, and listen to the Tastemakers, where we talk about all kinds of shows here on We Know Scripted TV.
Yeah. All right. Thanks so much for listening. And until next time, bye-bye.